When we talk recruiting, welcome back to the program. We throw out there Georgia and Alabama as teams that Tennessee needs to catch. Things changed yesterday after South Carolina with a strong close to their class, and let's make no doubt about it. The way that South Carolina finished against Tennessee and Clemson is a big factor in why they closed the class like they did. I don't know that there's a better coach out there than Shane Beamer and his excitable style that's able to capitalize on a couple of wins at the end of the season. So, Caleb, South Carolina, I don't think it's going to year recruit better than Georgia or Alabama or even Tennessee. But clearly they made a statement at the end of last year, and I think it helped their recruiting class yesterday as they pick up a couple of guys that either Georgia or Tennessee or both had interest in late, and Cam Pringle, Mazeo Bennett, and suddenly South Carolina's class looks pretty stout. Does that mean that they're going to be a more talented football program than Tennessee in the near future? I don't think so. But with all of those players that you talk about, there are always one or two or three that Tennessee over the years has had success with and has built championships around, if you want to go back to the late 90s. So, Caleb, your thoughts on what South Carolina did yesterday in National Signing Day before we get to some Tennessee guys that jumped on board late?
Yes, so South Carolina added tight end Nyckoles Harbor from Washington, D.C. Everybody thought he was going to Oregon. He's a 5-star across the board. Guys, in 2 years, we might be looking at the best receiving tight end in college football. I mean, we might be looking at Rob Gronkowski. Like, this guy is 6'5", 220. I think Shane Beamer is going to be able to plug him in immediately, and Spencer Rattler is just going to be able to throw him the ball. And if Spencer Rattler is anything like he was the last 3 games of this past year, that's a really dangerous combination to be in. Now, where does South Carolina go after Spencer Rattler? That is a question, because as we know, Spencer Rattler could just be one of those quarterbacks that kind of like Josh Dobbs and Butch Jones in 2015 and 2016, where Josh Dobbs kind of delayed the inevitable slide under Butch Jones. Condredge Holloway in the 1970s delayed the inevitable slide of Tennessee football under Bill Battle because that program was falling apart before, and Condredge Holloway slowed it. You wonder if Spencer Rattler's doing the same thing. But now he's got probably the biggest mismatch of a target in all the SEC, and we saw what they did at the end of last year. They also had, I want to note, a 4-star athlete, Deangelo Gibbs, who was initially at Georgia, transferred to Tennessee, transferred out, I believe, before Josh Heupel's first year. Maybe it was after his first year, and is now at South Carolina. He's played wide receiver and safety. Now, to be fair, even before the transfer portal became a thing, he was transferring like this. So maybe that is a red flag at that point. But I would say that, look, South Carolina, by a lot of standards, they have a top 20 class too across a lot of services. Now, Tennessee is ranked higher, but Tennessee does not want South Carolina to stay relevant that long. It's okay for them if Georgia and Alabama are prominent. It's okay if LSU is prominent. You expect that. South Carolina is a program that, just like Clemson, that will stand in Tennessee's way in trying to reach national prominence. They just will. Tennessee
They will, but I want to be sure and emphasize this point. They will, but not in the sense of they're going to out-recruit Tennessee as a whole ever. I mean, South Carolina was still 16. Tennessee was 8, if you want to go by the composite. So they're not going to up and destroy Tennessee suddenly in recruiting. But it's the 1 or 2 guys, it's the Sean Ellises of the world that you don't pick up that makes your team different. Those are the guys, the 1 or 2 guys that you pluck from there. It's not that you're going to go suddenly be a lower level recruiting program to South Carolina. That's just never going to happen. I mean, they're never going to be behind, and they're still significantly higher as a whole. But going in and being able to pluck a Mazeo Bennett, and it looked like Tennessee could at one point, that kind of dissipated, or a Cam Pringle, and I pick out those guys. Those are the guys that you build championships around, because you've pointed out, and I totally agree, based off, goodness gracious, 2+ decades of covering recruiting, you can't just win on Knoxville, Nashville, Chattanooga, Atlanta area talent. You're going to have to go into the Carolinas and have success there. I believe that firmly. And yeah, I mean, I think plucking some of those guys out of that state, and let's include North Carolina in there as well, is very important. And I think when you have South Carolina with some momentum, that's troublesome. Now, that being said, for guys like Cam Pringle and Mazeo Bennett that had an eye on Tennessee at one point, we are dealing with this in the transfer portal area. So if Shane Beamer and his coaching staff are the coaches that I believe they are, and that is subpar compared to Tennessee, then they could always transfer after a year. But at this point, I think if you're a Gamecock fan, you've got to be happy with what happened in this class. And you got to be happy with what happened over the past 4 months. I mean, I thought Shane Beamer might be on his way out. Now he's got a new contract and big wins over Clemson and Tennessee, in a very solid recruiting class as well.
Yes, that is very true. And you're right. We'll have to see how this plays out. South Carolina could still roll over. Spencer Rattler could fall apart. There's a lot of things that could go into play. Maybe Tennessee won't be the victim of a linebacker starting a fight with the quarterback because he's mad he's making less NIL money because he's delusional and doesn't realize that the bigger stars make more money, like welcome to life. And so all of that is stuff that's going to show up. And another problem with Tennessee is, look, arguably their most fertile recruiting ground is Memphis, and now they have to compete with Ole Miss for Memphis because Ole Miss is a lot closer to Memphis than Knoxville is, and Lane Kiffin is going to get a lot of those players. And
I don't even look at Memphis as an in-state recruiting.
Well, you got to remember though, when they were winning big in the '90s, West Tennessee in general, I mean, Cedric Wilson came from Memphis, Al Wilson came from Jackson, Andre Lott came from Memphis. They always had at least a pipeline to Melrose High School in Memphis. That was their pipeline back in the day. And
I look at Memphis as a bonus. If you have success there, that's great, but don't expect it.
Yeah, but for in-state talent, it's almost necessary because, look, I've said this a lot, and I get a lot of hate. I've covered enough recruiting for Tennessee football, at least the last 10 years. As Nashville grows in population, for some reason, the recruiting is not matching the growth. Nashville football recruits are just vastly overrated. They have been for a while. And maybe some of that was with Butch Jones, because Butch Jones did, as you've talked about, make calls and tried to inflate their rankings, but he locked off the Nashville area. But they were all just, again, I mean, the prized possession in Nashville was Jalen Hurd, and he was a total bust, and he was not a 5-star. That's more common than not from that area. The only, John Henderson was one story from Nashville, but that's really the only one. And I've maintained for years that, that area is overrated. There's not a lot of great high school football talent in East Tennessee to begin with. I mean, I think Chattanooga is probably better than Knoxville. You probably know more about that than I do, but I feel like more talents come out of Chattanooga than Knoxville.
Bobby Taco, and I love that name. It makes me think of a Hispanic version of King of the Hill. Says South Carolina has their Butch Jones false hope. I tend to agree with that. I really do. So I think that's what Shane Beamer is going to end up being. I know I sound like I'm hard on him, but that comes from a lot of people who know the coaches on that staff and who know that program well. So when I look at South Carolina, I think they're a thorn in Tennessee's side. And I'm not talking about the game last year. Any team can win a game on any given Sunday. But I think that South Carolina is a thorn in Tennessee's side. I don't think they'll ever vanquish Tennessee as the top, one of the top recruiting programs in the SEC.